نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So last week we discussed the 5 acts of fitrah, 5 acts of properly taking care of our body. Can anybody help us out and tell us what those 5 acts are, just as a quick review? What do you say? Okay, we talked about that. Anybody else remember any of the other 5 ways that we're supposed to naturally take care of our bodies? Okay, all right. You're going below the belt. Okay. What about nails, of course, both the hands and the feet? Clipping the nails is a part of the natural way that we're supposed to take care of our body. And with regards to the 4th and 5th is trimming the mustache and growing the beard. And also there are other narrations would add other things, for example, using the siwak. Also to clean the inside of the mouth by doing, rinsing that we do in the beginning of wudu, and cleaning the nose. And by the way, cleaning the nose is actually proven to be a method of preventing the likeliness of illness as well. Like basically, this is a place where bacteria can easily enter the body. No one knows this up until recent times, and this is research, like scientific, non-religious studies, saying that this is a critical area where bacteria enters inside. So our Prophet ﷺ, of course, taught us to make wudu, and he specifically said that whoever wants to or can OD, overdo the cleaning of the nose, let him do so. So if you can, sometimes when I get sick, I get allergies and stuff. So one thing that gives me relief is actually I have a special device which basically shoots water up from one nostril and cleans everything inside and basically brings it back out. And that basically gets rid of the allergen, whatever is bothering me so much, it's just somewhere deep inside. And the only way to get it out is to basically do a really deep, powerful rinse of the inside of the nose, basically. So this is something that our Prophet ﷺ taught us, that this is something that's beneficial for you to do. So let's jump in today. We will discuss the 8 preconditions or the shurut of wudu. Now when we say a shart, that means that if that thing must exist at the time or before you actually do the other thing of which this is a condition. If it doesn't exist, then that itself may be invalid. So, for example, for me to sell something, what would be a condition of that to be valid? I have to own it, right? So let's say that I'm selling something which I don't own yet. Islamically and even legally, this transaction is questionable or completely nullified at best. So we're going to discuss the 8 preconditions of wudu, the 6 obligations of wudu. Obligations are wajibat, 9 sunnah or sunan of wudu, and we'll talk about the issue of siwak as well a little bit again. So what is wudu? Wudu is obligation. Wudu is an obligation when it is time for salah. But if a person does not have to make salah, a person does not have to make wudu. However, it is sunnah, it is recommended, and we'll look at some of the hadith on the next slide, that wudu itself is an act of ibadah. It is only obligatory for salah and for tawaf, according to those who say that it is. But other than that, during your day, during 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. in the morning, after you have done your prayer, you don't have to remain in wudu. But to do wudu just for itself, that itself is an act of ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if a person does it with the intention that this is wudu. And there are many benefits of this as well. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he would go to sleep, he would make wudu. And this is also another one of those things that has that they say that if someone has trouble sleeping, they say that you should take a quick shower. Don't make it too long. If you make it too long, your sleep will go away for a long time. But if you take a quick shower, it will actually help cool down your body and help you go to sleep and have a better quality of sleep. Now, they don't know what wudu is, but our Prophet ﷺ taught us, make wudu. Wudu is the best, the quickest shower. Basically, just enough water on your body to cool it down, but not too much to make your sleep go away. So this is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ as well. So wudu has conditions, it has wajibat, shurut, wajibat, and sunan. So some of the ahadith with regards to wudu, the virtues of wudu, first of them, the Prophet ﷺ said that no one keeps being in the state of wudu except a believer. So to love to be in a state of wudu is a sign of iman in a person, because part of iman is to be clean, to be pure, and part of iman is for a person to be prepared for salah, that in case a person gets delayed and they're not able to get home. So it's a good habit to make, which is that whenever you leave your house, even though it may not be a time of salah, then it's a good habit to leave in the state of wudu. And it's a good habit that whenever you take a shower, make the intention of wudu in it as well. Make the intention of wudu in it. So every day, a lot of people that take a shower in the morning before they leave home for work or school or whatever, when we do that, just make wudu at that time. It will make your life easier, and inshallah, one of the things that we hope from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when the time of death comes, we would be in the state of wudu. Even that may have, if a person prepares, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before his moment of death, what did the Prophet do to prepare for death? He used the siwak, right? So to even think about this, that if it's my time of death coming in the next hour or so, whatever, next few hours, if I'm in the state of wudu, it would be better. So a person prepares for that, then this itself is something that alone might be enough that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may say, since you gave respect and prepared for this moment, maybe that is something that Allah loves so much that He may forgive everything else. So you never know, as the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا. Do not look down upon any good deed. Don't think anything is too small, but rather, if it's a good deed established in the Sunnah and you have a good intention for it, then don't think that it might not do anything. It's too small. Just do it, and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is the one who will accept. So, the second, the Prophet ﷺ said that this is an obligation without which Allah Subhanahu wa Taala does not accept our prayer, accept any prayer. So, without wudu, there is no salah. Also, this companion who narrating, this student of Abu Hurairah who's narrating this, he says, once I went up to the roof of the mosque along with Abu Hurairah, and he performed wudu and said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ saying, on the day of resurrection, my followers will be called al-ghur al-muhajjalun. From the meaning, basically, how would you translate this al-ghur al-muhajjalun? It would be people who are shining in the limbs that are washed in wudu. So this is kind of like a crowd or a group that's there, and among all the people, you can easily tell who is from the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. So, from the traces of ablution, and whoever can increase the area of his radiance should do so. So, there is a narration that one day, one of the students of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, he saw him making wudu. And what he did is that when he washed his arm, he went up to his shoulder. He went up to his shoulder. So after he did wudu, he turned around and he saw this person looking at him. So when he saw him, he told him that had I known that you were watching me, I would not have done this. Okay. Now, what's happening here is that Abu Huraira, radiallahu anh, he's trying to increase the area that's going to shine. But he's careful that if he does it in public and he does it all the time, then the people will start to say that wudu is up to the shoulder. So he doesn't do it in public when people are watching, he only does it privately. Meaning we have to be careful that people may be watching us and they're looking at us as a role model. And if they see us doing it, they will start to do it as well. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh says, if I knew that you were watching me, I would not have done this. Meaning, this is something that he does only in private. Only in private. So, also with regards to another hadith, and this is the famous hadith which actually has a lot of fiqh of wudu derived from it, and that is called the hadith of Uthman with regards to wudu. After performing the wudu, Uthman radiallahu anh said, I'm going to tell you a hadith which I would not have told you had I not been compelled by a certain ayah of the Quran. And that ayah, of course, is the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُمُونَ مَا أَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالْهُدَى, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns a severe punishment for those people who hide the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're not supposed to hide knowledge. So he says, verily those who conceal the clear signs, he says, I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, if a man performs wudu perfectly, meaning perfectly with ihsan, meaning to the best of his ability or her ability, and then offers the compulsory prayer, compulsory congregational prayer, so he comes and he is praying his fard prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive his sins committed between that prayer and the next prayer till he offers it. So subhanAllah, this is an amazing hadith. It is saying that if you make a really good wudu, good quality wudu, it's not that the sins of the past have been forgiven, but that the sins from this salah until the next salah are forgiven, that you haven't even committed yet. And this is why Uthman radiallahu anh says, I would not have told you this. Why? Because if people who don't have a basic level of taqwa, if they hear this, they're going to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do a really nice wudu right now, and I will do my salah, and then I'm going to go and commit a sin. So some things are not meant for the average person who has no understanding of Islam, basically you tell this to people that you would know they would not abuse it. They would not abuse it. So that's why Uthman radiallahu anh doesn't go openly telling everybody, hey, do this. But rather, he's saying that I will only telling you because I don't want to hide it, but this is not something that you go and give in the hand of every person. So let's look so basically this is just a very brief summary, but there are many, many benefits, virtues of making wudu and making wudu properly. Making wudu properly is something which is mentioned in many ahadith. And also there is a special virtue for making wudu at home instead of at the masjid. So we should have a habit of making wudu at home, and to make wudu at the masjid is only when there's a need to do so. But a person should make a habit of making wudu from home and then going wherever they need to go. So what are the conditions of wudu? The first is, of course, to be a Muslim. Now, why would a non-Muslim make wudu? So I was thinking about this, and the example I could come up with is, for example, let's say someone is about to take their shahada. So before they take their shahada, they go and they make wudu. And then they come and they take their shahada. Can they make salah with this wudu that they made before their shahada? That's why the scholars say that the wudu will count for a Muslim. It's good for anyone to do, but it will not count for his salah. The condition of it is that they have to be a believer. So in this case, basically, that shahada would be just for that wudu that he made. It's a nice thing to do, but legally it doesn't count. It has to be done by a Muslim. Also, being mentally sound. So if a person lost their sanity, then this person, their wudu will not count. So meaning, if a person made wudu while they were not mentally stable, and then after like 10-15 minutes they came back to their senses, they have to remake their wudu in order for salah, because no one really knows what exactly was going on in their mind when they made their initial wudu. So they have to be mentally sound. And number 3 is that they have to have discretion. Discretion is called tamyiz. And tamyiz is basically an age of a child where they're old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong. So some scholars, they put different ages on it, and it may have to do with the maturity of a child. But, I would say that when I see my 8-year-old son, I can tell that he knows the difference between right and wrong. My 5-year-old daughter may be a bit too young for that, where it might be easy for you to convince her to do the wrong thing because she's not, she has not reached the age of discretion yet. So some of the scholars have said that the age of 7 is the age of discretion. So basically, again, where it would apply, the scholars like to be very, very precise with that, but I can't see, I can't understand in what situation where that would be like the actual matter deciding factor. Anyways, number 4, and this is a really important one, which is having the intention to perform wudu. Meaning, maybe because of hot weather, a person comes and like, man, I'm so hot, I need to cool down. So they do exactly as a person does in wudu, but their intention right now was to just cool down. Can they make salah with that? What do you think? They cannot, because they did not intend to make wudu, they intended to just cool themselves down. Even though they did the same exact actions as wudu, but because they didn't have the intention. Same way, let's say a person is, for example, at the beach, or there's a very dusty environment, and they say, look, I just need to wash myself off. So they do exactly as you do in wudu, every single thing. But if they did not have the intention that I'm making wudu, then this wudu doesn't count. They cannot make salah with it. But what I would say is what we said earlier, which is if you are going to wash yourself anyways, just make the intention that I am making wudu. Even though you're not expecting to make salah, you're not expecting to do anything, just make the intention that I'm making wudu, because we said wudu itself is an act of ibadah. Wudu itself is an act of ibadah. So the intention is very important and it must be there, otherwise wudu will not be done. Also, using water that is tahir and tahur, depending on the definitions we talked about. Basically, water that is... Yeah. Yeah.
Would it be sufficient to submerge myself in the water, or do I need to go through the steps of making wudu?
Okay, so it's a very good question, which is that if you are at the beach or at the swimming pool and you have the intention to wudu and you jump and you dive into the pool, you submerge yourself completely, is your wudu done or not? Who says no? Raise your hand. Who says yes? Raise your hand. Okay. So the answer lies somewhere in between. The issue is that wudu will not be done, but ghusl can be done, which includes wudu in it. Okay? The reason for that is that wudu, one of the obligations of wudu is actually the sequence of wudu. It has to be done in the same manner. If you were to dive in, for example, or if you were to submerge yourself, your feet went in first. If you were just standing and you just sat down, or if you dived in, you dove in, your head would go in first. And part of the obligation of wudu is that everything has to be done in sequence. However, if you make the intention for ghusl, in ghusl there is no sequence required. If your entire body becomes submerged, your ghusl is done. So then, and ghusl is major purification, which automatically includes minor purification. So, next condition, we said that the water that we are using must be legal. Yes? It does not make a difference if it's ghusl wajib or not. The key in ghusl is that every single millimeter of your body must become wet. If that is done with the intention of ghusl, then your ghusl is done. Some of the scholars, they consider rinsing, gargling, and cleaning your nose to be obligations of the ghusl. Some of them say that they are part of your outer surface of the body, so which means that if you were to submerge yourself, your nose would probably get cleaned out as well. And you are supposed to clean your mouth as well, at the very least. And that would and some of them say that these are highly recommended sunnahs, but they're not necessarily obligation. We'll discuss ghusl next, inshallah, in more detail. So let's move on to the water that we are using. The water that we are using for wudu must also be pure water that is usable for wudu. Yani, it must not be impure. It must not be impure, and it must also not be a substance which is diluted with something other than an unnatural material like sugar or salt or something of that nature, unnaturally, artificially, which has changed either the color, the smell, or the taste of that water, right? We already talked about water, so we don't need to discuss that in more detail. We can go back and review that session. The next condition is that the water is legally obtained, okay? If you don't have your own water and you steal someone's water to make wudu with it, that wudu does not count because you did not obtain that water legally. And this is a key point where, you know how a lot of people, they worried about halal meat and how the meat was slaughtered, but they're not worried about where they got the money from to buy that meat. So you are worried about making your wudu properly with stolen water. That water itself is haram. So if a person does not have permission to use water and they don't have any of their own, then this would qualify them to make tayammum, which we will also discuss later. The next condition is to perform istinja or istijmar if making wudu after relieving oneself. Okay, so that is basically if a person used the bathroom, then there must not be any impurity left on their body, otherwise their wudu would be invalid because they are still impure. So a person has to make sure that any traces of urine or feces are removed from their body. And we mentioned that there are two methods of doing that. Istinja is to use water, and istijmar is to use other methods like toilet paper or mud ball or things like that people used to use before. Removing what may prevent water from reaching the skin of the parts of the body that must be washed as well. Okay, so if there's any part of the body that is covered with something that will prevent the water from reaching your skin, parts that need to be washed. So basically your arm up to your elbow, your face. Other parts could be covered, no problem. But when it comes to wudu, and you only need to make wudu, then those parts must be touched by water properly, otherwise wudu will not be done. And that's why nail polish, I'll come to your question in a second. Nail polish, one day I got this liquid Band-Aid. Liquid Band-Aid is a spray that you spray on a wound, and it will basically, you don't see anything, but it will basically form a waterproof cover on top of your wound, so no blood or any germs and nothing like that will go in. So I did it, and then when it's time to came for wudu, I couldn't take it off. I was like, okay, what do you do now? So I had to go and I had to look up the instructions on how to remove it. And they said that if you want to remove the old one, you spray some more on it, because the fresh one has something in it which will make it wet. So basically it will allow you to wash off the old one. So now you would be allowed to do wudu on top of that if your wound was dependent on not being touched by water. Okay, if proper healing was in danger, if you touch it with water, then there's an exception for that. But normally nail polish, basically if you're wearing any type of gloves, if you have some sort of a, basically anything that will prevent the water. So even when you're wearing a watch, right, when you make wudu, so you have to basically slide your watch while you're washing the area to make sure that the water reaches the area. So that's why, now with regards to nail polish, there's apparently a nail polish in the market which is called breathable nail polish, which is made of some sort of material which actually does not prevent water from reaching your skin. So that's really the only type of nail polish that could be used by women. Other than that, if they put it on, they basically have to remove it by the time they have to make wudu again. Yes, brother. Okay, so we will cover the socks a little bit later, but today we are just learning wudu in its default form. Okay, we'll discuss the complications later. So these are the shurut of the wudu. If any of these are not met, then a person's wudu would not be acceptable, no matter how good of a wudu they do. If one of these are not there, then their wudu would not be valid. Now we look at the obligations of wudu, and there are 6 obligations of wudu. There are 6 obligations of wudu. So let me see if we can guess the 6 obligations of wudu. You can obviously see 2 of them on the screen. So what are the 6 obligations? One of them is washing your face. One of them is washing your arms until the elbows. What else? Wiping your head. That's number 3. Washing your feet. Number 4. Do it in sequence. Number 5. What's number 6? What is that? The timing, yes. So it must be done in succession. Meaning you can't, start your wudu, wash your face, wash your arms, go cook some chicken biryani, come back and continue where you left off. So it has to be done in sequence, one after another. So let's look at it in a little bit detail. So now notice that these are the 6 obligations of wudu. So if you're ever in a hurry, if you're ever sick, if you're too tired, what you need to do wudu are these 6 things. And even in these 6 things, 4 of them are actual things to do. 2 of them are basically how you do them, which is sequence and succession. So the first one is washing the whole face. Washing the whole face, and rinsing the mouth and nose is included in this by some scholars, while others consider that to be a sunnah. So meaning you don't have to rinse your mouth and clean your nose, but you just have to wash the outer part of your face. And the face is defined by the scholars as hairline to the chin and from one earlobe to the other earlobe. So basically, hairline to the chin and one earlobe to the other earlobe. Everything in between here, it has to be wet. It has to be touched by water, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind with regards to making wudu is that you don't have to take tons and tons of water and go like this. You could take a tiny amount of water and you rub it every crevice of your face, and your obligation is completed, even by little amount of water. So the first one is that, as we mentioned, the washing the whole face, and notice that it doesn't say 3 times. Okay, only once is an obligation. Number 2 is washing the forearms. So when we say forearms, the whole thing is the arm. This is the hand. This is the forearm. This is, if you talk about this part, you talk about the arm, right? So you wash up your forearms, but you have to include the elbow. You have to include the elbow in it, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And you begin from the tip of your fingers all the way back until and including the elbow. Now, why is that important to understand? Because sometimes some people, they say, well, when I started making wudu, I washed my hands. So now I wash from here onward. No, that's not acceptable. It has to be washed from the tip of the finger all the way up to the elbow. Even though you washed your hands before, that doesn't count in this. Because remember, you washed those hands before you washed your face. There was no sequence there. So it has to be from the tip of the finger all the way up to and including the elbow. And we must make sure, a very common spot, what people do is that they take water like this from the faucet and they go like this. So when you go like this and the water flows down, it basically flows down like this and it goes around and often the part in the back may be left. Also, this part here, very easily, the water basically slides off from the sides. This part may remain dry. So a person, what needs to do is take the water, whether you pour it or you put your arm under the faucet or whatever, but then take the other hand and rub every part of it. And this is part of the perfection of wudu, right? When we talked about do it to the best of your ability, make sure everywhere water reaches, okay? If you are a hairy person, then you have to make sure you rub everything to get the water in, that every single inch of this has to become wet. The third obligation of wudu is to wipe the whole head, And now the thing about the whole head, there's some difference of agreement on this. Now we are talking about a basic wudu right now. We're not talking about any complications. So what a person does is that you take your hands and you put them in water or you dip them in water, and they don't have to be flowing with water. They just have to be wet hands. And a person goes like this, and they go all the way back to the back of the hair, like the neck part, the nape part where the hair end, and then you come back. Okay? So if a person has long hair, they don't have to wipe all of their hair. We're talking about the head, not the hair. Okay? So basically they have to go to the back of the head and they have to come back. So the ears are also treated as part of the head, in the sense that the Prophet ﷺ, as we'll see, that when he would wipe his head, he would then also take a wet finger and he would basically clean the ears as well. Okay? But ears, again, is not part of the obligation. It is part of the sunnah. It's part of the sunnah. What if the head is covered by a hijab or a turban or a bandage of sort? So this is where the little bit of a complication comes in. So in one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he was wearing a turban. He was wearing a turban, and he basically moved his turban back, and the Sahaba said that about a quarter of the head back. Quarter. And he basically wiped the head, and then he continued on his turban, and he came back. Okay? So now, based on this hadith, some of the scholars, they said that the minimum that you must do is 1/4 of the head. And based on this hadith, the other scholar said that you have to do the whole head. They said because if it was just a quarter, then the Prophet could have just gone up to the quarter and come back. But he went all the way. But we see that there's a ruqsa here, which is that if you are wearing some type of headgear where it is difficult to take off. A turban, as you know, that it's not always easy once you put it on. It's like a complicated affair to put on a proper turban. So if you are wearing any type of headgear, which is hard to take off, it's difficult. Same way, for example, with hijab for a woman. You know, we all know that how long it takes sisters to put their hijab on. So, and also in some cases they may be out in public, and they may be in a public bathroom. They may be somewhere out in the open. So in this case, the scholars have said that the Prophet ﷺ, based on a number of other evidences, there is leniency in this matter that you can wipe over that. But again, like we said, not things which can easily come off, not things which are not, like if somebody is wearing some sort of hairstyle and they don't want to mess up their hair. This is not considered to be a matter of ruqsa, but rather a matter of ruqsa is when there is slight difficulty for a good reason. Okay, maybe they're wearing some sort of headgear or something like that. Number 4 is to wash the feet, including the ankles. Wash the feet, including the ankles, and again, we'll discuss the socks later. Again, the feet have to begin from the tip of the toes, and they must go and include the ankle, and we must make sure that the bottom of the heel is another spot where a lot of people, the water is running